Welcome to the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, where we are trying to help you find your faith and not lose any sleep. So I guess it is time to wake up and pray up. Hey, I am Wes Easley, one of your hosts at Loafin' It on Twitter, and I also have with me Michelle and Pierre Wilson. You can find Pierre at PeeWee31 over on Twitter. You can find Michelle at GoPackGo411 over on Twitter. Don't forget to follow the show as well. Please follow the show at Finding Faith Pod. And you can also leave a comment there in whatever listening platform you like to listen to the show on, whether it's iTunes or whether it's Google Play, whatever you can do that. Leave a 5-star rating if you can. Don't want you to lie. We are on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, but we would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment there. It helps with all the algorithm stuff and everything like that to get the message out to more people. But let me welcome in my two friends, Pierre and Michelle Wilson. Welcome in, Michelle.
Thanks, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And I know you have your better half with you there. Pierre's with you as well, right?
Yes, he is.
I am here. I'm not used to being first. I'm used to like the starting guard coming out first. You went to her first, threw me off a bit.
Thanks, Wes.
I switched it up a little bit. I get in a routine, and I don't like, I like to switch things up and not have necessarily a routine going into each and every one of them. I like to vary it up, and I like it whenever I listen to things and it gets varied up a little bit. And I also like trivia. And I don't know if you guys like trivia or not. I enjoy trivia. I have one trivia question for you to kind of get this trivia section of our podcast pumped up a little bit more, just so we can get used to it. Let me ask you this, and you could either say Michelle or Pierre, as far as who knows the answer right. Okay, or first, I guess first. Okay, so
get our competitive juices flowing. That's good.
How many books of the Bible are there?
Oh.
You know he's Googling this right now.
That'll count.
Look at I don't know.
Look, Michelle's gonna say, I don't know.
I don't know.
Pierre is gonna.
I wasn't Googling it, so I have a Bible app that I was gonna try to skim to see
You're
if
gonna
I
try to count it.
Count, but I don't think I can do it that quickly.
I understand, and these are things that for me as a Christian now, I missed out on all this stuff whenever I was a kid. You know what I mean? And the Bible and Christianity and faith seemed very intimidating to me because I didn't know any of this stuff. And whenever I walked into a place or I walked into a Bible discussion or something and I heard people talking about it, I just felt like the odd man out. And it felt like so much information that there was no way that I could ever learn all of these things. But eventually I did. I think it kind of stuck a little bit. I do forget things because it wasn't introduced to me until I started paying attention, really, whenever I started going to church or going to meeting, or, anything like that. I didn't really start paying attention for a long time. I was kind of going through the motions, if you know what I mean. And so it got introduced to me a while into it, like I was 28, something like that, probably 5 or 6 years into my faith. It actually is when I started going, I might want to try to learn this stuff. So anyway, so did you find out? Did you Google it, Pierre?
I didn't Google. I was trying to count, and it was like 66 or 67. But if you Google it, and it's a different number there. So I'm really confused now.
And you know what? Here's the thing. Like,
yeah.
I agree with you, Wes. I was the same way growing up. I mean, we believed in God, but my dad got really fed up with. My parents got really fed up with kind of the talking behind people's back or judgment that he was witnessing in the church that we were going to at the time. And that kind of turned him off and turned my family off. And, we would watch some of the big preachers like Robert Schuller and those types of things at home on Sundays. And, it was always one of those things that we believed in God and wanted to do the right things, follow those 10 commandments. But it wasn't anything that I'm with you on I felt like I was behind the 8 ball. And really, honestly, very intimidated, and still am in a lot of respects when it comes to, knowing your Bible and all those Bible stories. And I've been very transparent about that in our life group when we meet, and, just saying, I don't feel necessarily worthy of being your life group leader. But, as far as life experiences go, I've got those check there. But But as far as, knowing all of those things, and I think that's where this podcast for us comes into play, because we are just your real average people finding our faith. And so, quite honestly, that's a lot of the platform of this, is that we just don't know all that trivia, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Or anything. So whenever we talk about the Ten Commandments, one of the ways that I learned this stuff was actually starting to teach classes, and so they stuck me in a little kids class, and I'm sitting there, I got to know some things, I got to know some things, and so one of the 66 books, like in a typical Bible that you would have at the house, probably the number one selling Bible. And now if you're in the Catholic Church, it's actually a little bit more, 73 books if I'm not mistaken, and it has some apocryphal books in there is what it's called, and so they include more books in there where not necessarily like the King James version, New King James, however, whatever version you have at the house there, New International Version. They only have 66 books in there, and those were canonized throughout church history. Those were widely accepted as being, authenticated from the original writers and having most of the manuscript documentation that they go way back there for the people who actually wrote them. So that's why we got 66. Catholic has 73, so that's where it is.
Hey, it's Pierre with the Finding Faith, Losing Sleep podcast. Apologies for the interruption, but we did notice after the recording that we ran into some interference during this episode. We considered recording the episode again, but feared it wouldn't come off as authentic and the content felt too good not to publish. Thank you for your understanding, and we're working towards addressing this issue for future episodes.
That makes sense. Thanks, Wes.
Hey, there you go. And Ten Commandments were one of those things inside of those books. And when people talked about the Ten Commandments, I'd always heard about them. I didn't necessarily know what they were when I was growing up as a kid. I didn't understand them for sure. I wouldn't know where to find them. The book of Exodus is where you can find them, Exodus chapter 20. And to me, the only time I ever had access to the Ten Commandments was at Easter time with the Moses movie. You know what I mean? I've never watched it. I think Charlton Heston, Moses, I think is how it's famously said. And parting the Red Sea, and then he had the Ten Commandments, I believe, at some point. That's where I was introduced to the Ten Commandments anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of neat because I don't get into those shows much at all. I always found them boring. I think The Chosen is probably the only show that's really connected with me, and that's a newer one. But it's also why I thought it was important. Like Michelle read off last week the percentage that can name the Three Stooges versus the percentage that knew even half of the Ten Commandments. And I think it's tough because you can see some folks are saying, these are just like society bylaws that were put into place. You hear that at times when it comes to these. But, I mean, when you go through them and you start to dissect and dive into what they really are, you can see why they are just important.
No, definitely, because they are rules for society, and they were even rules, back then and we talked about it last week, I think, Michelle, or 2 weeks ago, whenever we last spoke, that the Ten Commandments were kind of broken into two different categories or sections. One is to love God, and the other one was to love your neighbor as yourself, I believe.
So when I was researching, I came across this little commandments rhyme. And basically I think it's for children, but I mean, we could use it as adults, right? Like how to remember it. And so how it goes is no other gods, no idols, no lust, no false blame. Don't murder, steal, or covet. Don't misuse God's name. Keep the Sabbath holy. That's 9 down, 1 to go. Honor mom and pop. That's 10. You're good to go. So I thought that was kind of cool because it's a really quick and easy way how to remember them. And so I just thought I'd share it really quickly.
No, that's good. And I love that stuff because when I started teaching the kids things, I was like, okay, I'm never going to be able to remember this, And I went, well, hold on a second. How do I remember the alphabet?
Right.
And it's because it's to that song, and whoever wrote that song has basically written everything I've ever known. I mean, it's so I'm like, okay, I got to learn songs. I got to know kids' songs. I got to know. So I did. That's how I started putting some of that stuff in my brain, whether it was the books of the Bible in order, or New Testament, or disciples, or I just said, okay, when I learned all this stuff, it was to songs, it was to music, it was to kids' stuff, and that may seem silly to some people, but boy, it sure did work for me. And that's how I kind of learned all that stuff. And going back to like the last episode where we talked about idols, no other gods before me. That was number 1. No idols. Don't make for yourself any graven images. That was number 2 commandment. You shall not take the Lord your God's name in vain. Did I say that right? Do not take the name of your Lord God in vain. There you go. I slowed it down. I slowed it down. So that, and then we got number 4 about the Sabbath day. And the Sabbath day is kind of like one of those controversial things even today of, do people in New Testament times or dispensation, which we are in now, do they still have to keep the Sabbath day? When was the Sabbath day? Was it Saturday? Is it Sunday? What is all this stuff? And God ultimately, when he was creating the world, when he was creating the universe, when he was creating man, he created us in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th day. And that's the Jewish tradition. And he gave that commandment to the Jewish people to rest on the Sabbath day. I don't want you to work. I don't want you to do anything. I want you to prepare in order for one day to be of rest. And I think that was for the people. I think, by the way, because we can work ourselves to death, by the way, if we allow ourselves to, and we can neglect our family because of work, etc. But also we can neglect God. And I think that was part of that Sabbath day as well, was to be able to focus on God, focus on family, focus on rest, and not focus on things of the world. I don't know if you agree with me on that, Pierre, or not.
I do. And I think it just shows the importance of rest. You look at the fact that God, rested himself. Did he have to? Probably not, but he did. And it's important for us to, I feel, follow that, like you stated, because, we're human. We need our batteries recharged, and it's tough to be go, 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 like all the time. There's always going to be something you can do, whether it be chores around the house, whether it be stuff outside the house, yard work, whatever you want to call it. There's always something you can do. Work for your job. There's a never ending cycle, I feel, with things that you could actually do if you really wanted to. So the fact that something's in place to rest, I think it's important. Why is that in place? What do you need to recharge? If God says you need to do it, there's probably a purpose behind it. So I think we should really work on making that effort to do so.
I agree. I will say this is probably one of the more difficult ones for me in general, just because, when you work Monday through Friday and then you have your Saturday, Sunday weekend, you're kind of limited if you're trying to squeeze everything into Saturday to rest on Sunday. That being said, I 100% agree that rest is important and probably not the thing that I'm the best at. So how do you feel about that, Wes?
I'm pretty good at resting. I have no issues. I just turned 50. I got no problem in resting whatsoever. But a lot of that too was back in the day, especially in Jesus's time. It was people. I don't want to say not preparing for it, but using it as a law that really wasn't there. This was a great story of Jesus whenever he would heal somebody on the Sabbath day to kind of make an example that he was God. And I mean, you got the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all those people just freaking out because Jesus performed a miracle on that day. And he maybe even forgave a sin or two along the way, and they were like, no, you can't do that. It's Sabbath day. And Jesus is like, no, which one of you, if you had a ox that fell into a hole or a mule that fell into a hole, wouldn't save that mule on the Sabbath day? All I did was heal somebody. I healed a person. I healed a man, but you're putting that in front of an animal because it was a selfish desire or something. And I think that we could do that too if we take if we don't look at the Sabbath day as being on Saturday, and that's a whole nother discussion, right?
Right.
It's the Lord's day is where I'm kind of concentrating on this. Those selfish desires, we can do that. I know I can do that, putting it before God, or it goes back to the idol, goes back to the idol worship, or not having God first. On Sundays, whenever maybe I have an opportunity to go to church, when I go to church, and instead of that, boy, NFL season's about to kick off in 2 weeks, man. And it's gonna be tempting. It's gonna be tempting, right? Not really, because it's just a tradition now for me to go to church, and I'm not gonna miss anything. Yeah, I'm thankful to God for DVRs and stuff like that too, or game replays. So I don't feel the pressure to miss any of that stuff, but we can put those selfish desires there in front of that time that we need to devote to God. Even though we're walking in that walk 7 days a week, there's a special time that's set aside to be able to do some things with other people who are like-minded.
Yes. And I think Pierre will agree with me that when COVID hit and, we were kind of kind of forced to watch church online or have our life group online, like especially church, it was not the same feeling, like very difficult to really feel like you're in touch and staying tuned into it, versus now where we can go back physically to the building and just kind of be in the presence of others and have that, the Holy Spirit and feeling so energized. Like it's a completely different feeling.
Well, yeah, because it's hard to focus. Like if you're at home, it's hard to focus, on God, which is, the reason you're going to church. Yeah, you're just going to a building, but it's ultimately you're dedicating that time to put your focus on God. And being at home, it was tough because you're looking around and you see maybe what needs to be cleaned up. You see your kid and how they're acting and things along those lines.
Or the dog.
Yeah, and be the dog standing at the door being let out. You don't have those concerns when you're at the church, but again, you had context with the whole Sabbath piece, which I think we'll get into context here in a later episode. But when you put that context into what Jesus meant, with the Sabbath versus what the Pharisees thought it was from a law standpoint, it's a completely different story.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely different. And so again, we'll get into that later, but that's what I just feel that it's another one of the situations that ties into that first one where you're putting God first when you're obeying him and you are taking that day of rest. I don't personally think it needs to be a specific day. Sunday, yeah, that's the one that, we all tend to go to. That's when the churches are open, etc. But again, I don't think that, God's just the church. He's not just the building. So as long as you're taking that day to recognize him, put him first, dive into his word, I think that's what matters. And you're recharging yourself spiritually, not just physically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can hear that a little bit more, especially during those COVID times or during those tumultuous times. But there's also something to be said with, like in the book of Hebrews, where it talks about figuring out a way to stimulate one another to love and good works. It's hard to do that whenever, and there's so many loving one another phrases. There's so many loving one another commandments that are there. It's hard to do that if you exclude yourself as a Christian from other Christians and say, hey, I can fuel my godly fire out here on the 18th green,
Okay. In isolation.
Yeah. And it's hard to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm definitely not sitting in the judgment seat of God, and I'm not trying to pass judgment on it. I just know for me personally, it's hard to get to know other people and know how I can serve others, which, is the second half of these 10 commandments here a little bit more. And for other people to know how to serve me and where my weaknesses are to help build me up, because, there are things that I need in life too, that only others can possibly give me, as far as an encouraging word, a slap on the back. And I may not think I need those people or that kind of community around me until something bad happens, and then all of a sudden when they come around me, I'm really thankful that they're there. At the same time, if something bad happens to somebody in that community, I need to be there to kind of try and lift that person up too. And I may not be able to know what that is if I'm not present with them on a regular basis. That's
right.
What I think, that is.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I know you hear us talk life groups. I feel like that's a big part of it, and kind of an extension, I feel, of the church, is because you can actually surround yourself with other like-minded Christians and just talk through life. That's why it's called life group. And you can do that in a group setting. You can do that with just a couple, but that's the important portion that I feel like a lot of folks miss. You get your worship, your Sunday church, and you kind of go home and start back from square one. You show up Sunday and you're like, man, I'm back to the beginning. Whereas I feel life groups and meeting, those other people going through the same, journey that you're going through helps you throughout the week continue to live out what you focused on Sunday. That way you're not back to square one once you're back in the actual building.
Well, and not only that, but we went through what the church calls rooted, and with our life group. And I really believe that was the time that we really became rooted with one another. It really grounded us and gave us that deep dive into one another and into our lives. And we were just raw and honest. And so when you have people that know you deeply and still love you, still care for you, and still want what's best for you, I really believe that's what God wanted for all of us. And so it's refreshing and humbling to have people in your life that are, just willing to be there with you and to walk alongside you.
Totally. Make sure all the kids are in the room here. We're on number 5 here. I think it is number 5. Make sure, bring all the kids in the room, because this one is to honor your father and mother. Mm-hmm. And that, it goes back again to the community type of thing, and being able to meet each other's needs. And look, you guys may not know this or not, but in the Old Testament, if there was a child who did not honor their father and mother, like if they were disgraceful, they would actually take the child, and they were encouraged to bring the child out in front of everybody and throw rocks at them, stone them, to put them to death if they did not honor their father. That was a big commandment back then. We see it today as saying, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that kind of a thing. And that is honorable. But it's also making your parents proud. It's not doing things that would cause shame to fall on your name and then to God's name, because a lot of people will wear that family name as they were Jews back then in the day of Exodus and when these 10 commandments were made. But I think in Christianity as well, I had an opportunity to have a position at the church, and it was an eldership position. I believe my child, though, from what I can read in Timothy and Titus, that she needed to be a Christian. This was years and years ago, before anything, before she got older. And I said, no, I can't do it, because I haven't been through life yet. I haven't raised a child yet. And I believe I need to do that to be able to experience that, so I can know how to do it before I can be in an eldership position to be able to encourage people on how to raise a child. So that was something that I had to do, but I had to get through those honoring your father and mother times first, because man, I was never taught how to honor my father and mother. I just never was. And so I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to teach somebody on how to do that either.
Yeah. I mean, and you look at the Greek word for honor, it's, revere, prize, value, and you can see why that's important. And I know that could be a struggle for some, at least living in today's culture, because everyone doesn't have great parents. Everyone doesn't have the privilege of being raised in a great household, etc. But it's not about them. It's about you and how you continue to value them, continue to respect them as your authority. And you look at Jesus himself, like he's the Messiah, and he had earthly parents. You look at Mary, you look at Joseph, he still honored them, even knowing who he was, what his calling was, early on. I think that's one of the bigger examples that you can look at, that Jesus himself practiced honoring his own earthly, mother and father, in addition to his heavenly father. So that was, to me, a big example that we can try to all be like.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is where I have a different perspective, because I was raised with 2 really amazing parents, and quite honestly, I just never wanted to disappoint them pretty much my whole life. So I probably had my more rebellious years after I moved out than I did while I was living at home. So my parents are amazing, and I'm super thankful for them. And so I think I've even asked them, how did you make me want to do the right things? Because it wasn't like they, set me down and said, here's what you have to do. It was more of I still am not 100% sure how they did it. They just instilled in me this desire to want to please them, to want to do the right things, and to not let them down. And I think I still need to get some better pointers from them still. So
No, I understand that. I don't know how to do those things either. And I try to tell my daughter, hey, give us a little grain of salt here. We're first time adults ourselves. I've never been an adult before. And as as I was a kid, I never saw adulting. So I'm not sure how to do it other than by being around those people that I see raising children in an honorable that are honoring and loving their father and mother, and trying to make them proud. I watch that stuff and I try to implement those things into my family or into my household, but I'm still just kind of learning how to do this myself. Joe Biden recently allowed people to have a $10,000 tax credit towards their college education. And I'm sitting there going, well, what about those of us who went to the School of Hard Knocks? I went there for several years and I paid a big price for going to that. I wish I could get a little money back for that kind of college education. That's what I was thinking. But for me, implementing these things into my life or into my family's life, it's a first generational stuff. And I always encourage my daughter, if you think things are nice, if there's some things that are nice, please build on them for your family. Whenever you get old enough and you have a family and you can think back to how you were raised, build on the things that your mother and I are trying to implement in our house so that you can continue a tradition of having a respectable, honorable house that you could be proud of. That's what I try to tell her.
I think that's great advice, Wes.
Well, yeah, and in addition, like you say, you haven't done it, but you've lived life. By the time most people become parents, they've lived life, be it as a child where they got to see how their parents responded to situations, to adversity, but you've also gone through things by the time you become a parent. So you're knowledgeable and you can share that knowledge, that wisdom with them. And it's not always the answer that they want, but you've been through the fire to some extent to be able to tell them right from wrong, because you've done right and wrong yourself. So the Lord puts you in those situations to where you are equipped to raise whoever he's put you in, charge of raising, based off, that story that you've gone throughout your life to get to that point of having that child.
And that's so valuable.
No, that is, and I can definitely tell her what not to do. Right? No, let me tell you why. And I've gone many places, given my testimony at a lot of different places. People come up to me and they'll say, man, your testimony was so good. I say, well, what's yours? And I listen to it for a minute. And some people are like, well, I've never done anything like that. I've always just been a church kid, I've just never really gone anywhere. And I said, man, that is a great testimony. Don't shy away from thinking that I have to stand in front of the church or in front of a group and tell them how all the horrible things I did and how God changed my life. We need to hear your success stories too, that there is possibilities for children to grow up in a church, not do anything wrong, go on and have productive lives, and the entire time stay on the straight and narrow path. I think so many times people talk about a great testimony. We all have our own testimonies, and I would love to hear a testimony that is boring, all right, quote unquote boring. Somebody who has done the right things their entire life, because I don't know that it can be done. I want to know that it can be done. I want my child to know it could be done. I want them to see somebody cool, somebody awesome, somebody great standing in front of a crowd and going, I never did anything wrong, really. I mean, I've done these little things, but I never went out and I was never a drug addict. I was never a drunkard. I was never, I never did all those things. I did nothing. I stayed on the straight and narrow, and everybody always called me a clean-cut kid, and I'm standing before you saying that you can do it too. I would love for my child to hear that, but so many times they don't get the recognition that somebody who has overcome a lot of things in their life has gets the recognition for.
That's an excellent point, Wes, and I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, all walks of life. We just, talk about our own backgrounds, but people need to be able to relate to how they see themselves, and you often don't hear those positive stories. Like everyone's come from something, everyone went through something hard, something tough. If that's not the case, then you need to share that as well, because that there could be someone that's not going through difficult times. Things might be okay, they might be content, and so those same scenarios, you're a domino in that process as well. to relate to someone who's in a similar lifestyle as you.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes maybe somebody's difficult time is just a different perspective, right? Like my difficult time may be vastly different from Pierre's or from yours. And I think it really does take all perspectives. And I think that you hit the nail on the proverbial head when, you say that it's important for all of everybody, everybody's story is important. And I agree with what Pierre said in that, God placed us where he wanted us, and we went through the things that we went through, and we're qualified to be the parents to the ones that he gave us. So right. I 100% agree with both of you on those.
I'm just glad Jesus shared his testimony, even though he was a sinless man. That's yeah. I'm sure glad we know that story a little bit, and he was able to speak up. Hey, these other last 10 commandments, we're going to get through them all here because these last ones, I don't want to say they're lumped together because they're all important, but you shall not murder. That's kind of easy.
Pretty
right?
Self-explanatory, isn't it, Wes? I hope so anyway.
we get that one. I get that one. I understand. You shall not commit adultery. Now, there's a bigger one in today's world, I think, where it's easier and more accessible maybe to even commit adultery. It's also easier to get caught nowadays because there's a lot of information flowing around out there where, somebody's not where they're supposed to be, or somebody did this and they weren't supposed to be. And bad news, good news travels fast, but bad news will beat you home. So that's something that we all have to be aware of. And, committing adultery, I do think that can get into what we look at, what we see. Maybe even what we hear nowadays in some of the songs that are on the radio, because all those things can affect our mindset and the direction that we want to go or that we think we need to go. I think we get sold a bad bill there, or I think we get sold some bad commentary on what makes a man. And I know that was back in my day, men were always the ones who were running around. Now I think with some of the music, and I don't listen to it all. Okay. I don't listen. I just hear enough of it to go, wow, she said that, whoa. And so now it's, promiscuity is even going over to the women's side. I think the way it was portrayed in the man's side, where you had to be cool to be a womanizer, womanizers are cool. Sure. And now I think that manonizers, I don't know if I just made up a word.
I think you did. Yep.
Are cool on the woman's side as well, just like back when I was growing up, it was for men. And that's a bad rap, man. Those are some bad information that we're getting, and kids are absorbing, adults are absorbing, and then all of a sudden you think that that's the way it's supposed to be, and it's not.
Right, because it's becoming more widely, quote unquote, accepted and commonplace. I mean, those are just the facts. I mean, any movies you watch or TV shows, or like you said, songs, it's just quote unquote the norm now. And that's not okay. And I agree with you when you say it's not just actually the commission of the sin, right? It could very well be in something that you're watching, or the thoughts in your head, or what your intention is behind flirting, or those types of things. So
I remember a TV show called Cheaters. Honestly, I used to watch it with my mom, and I think it was Joey Greco or something was the host. And as a kid, I found it hilarious. Just watch it and just seeing the drama involved, and it's so funny. People get caught. That it's not me. It's like, what do you mean it's not you? You're on camera right there with this person. And then it gets to the end, and that's when the show kind of hits the reality. Like, someone's hurt. Like, whoever hired this agency to find this out, like, they're gutted. The person they care for, they love, they found out, and now the realization hits in that your whole life's basically just changed because your loved ones cheated on you. And so that's the tough part here. Like, when you look at that being faithful, there's a human emotion attached to that people don't really, I don't think they consider that in the process of when they do these things. They're off looking for something selfishly for themselves, looking for some void to be filled. But after that's all done, there's another life involved. There's another emotion involved. And you often see the regret, oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know why I did it. And at that point, it's too late. But that's what this commandment's, telling you. Like, it's trying to warn you. There's hurt,
repercussions.
There's hurt, there's heartache involved in this, and that's why you shouldn't do it. And so it's, you got wedding vows, etc., but there's real human life emotion, really, in all these that we're getting ready to hit, even the, the murder stuff. I think death's one of the hardest things to go through in this earthly life, even with those with faith and, you believe in heaven, you believe in, even hell. I think hell doesn't get enough credit at times. Everyone's assuming folks are all going to heaven. No, hell's for real. Some of these folks aren't in a better place, but it's not your authority, I don't know the word, to put someone there yourself when it comes to murdering someone. So just keeping all that in mind, how many human emotions are involved with when you violate these type of commandments that you have, and just the impact that it has on others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And as a child, I used to get hurt by some of these. I had a stepdad right after my father passed away, married my mom. And so he was the guy who I called dad. I remember that he used to send me outside as a boy. He used to send me outside to play. And I didn't figure it out until later on in life, really. I mean, probably 10 years later, because I had to be 5, 6, 7 years old, kindergarten, first grade. I don't know, somewhere in that neighborhood. And he would send me outside to play. But what I didn't realize at the time was he was bringing women inside to play with while he sent me outside to play. Mm-hmm. And I didn't put that together, like I said, until years and years later. And man, I'm telling you, 10 years later, I couldn't believe that I called him dad. I made me so mad that I called him dad. And he hurt my mother that way. And then he hurt me that way. And I honestly, I used to, as a young man, I'd be like, if I ever see him, I'm gonna kill him. That's what my thought process was. And later on, of course, the bygones are bygones, and whatever happened to him. I don't know. I never saw the man again after we left. Pretty quickly, I think one day my mother and I left that house, and one thing leads to another. If you commit adultery with somebody's spouse, they're going to want to kill you. They're going to think about murdering you. So they're breaking, commandments are being broken and all this stuff. And so these commandments, like we talked about before, these rules by God are not to keep us stifled into a certain mold. They're right. To protect us from getting hurt is what they're there, and from hurting others is what it is. And I love what you said, Pierre.
Another, right?
Yeah. And Pierre, you're right when you talk about the things, kind of hurting other people that are involved, and you may not be able to think about all the different people involved. But man, it sure, adultery sure does destroy a lot of lives, not just your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get kids involved, family members, of that spouse that have grown to believe in you, trust in you, confide in you, and friends, mutual friends. It just rips a hole through everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we got to set those parameters up ourselves. God set some up for us, but we got to set parameters up ourselves on how to not get involved in relationships that may get touchy and feely, I guess, as time goes on. Another one, last ones here, I think kind of all go together, and we can break them down a little bit more if we need to. But you shall not steal your neighbor's stuff, of course, because you can't steal your own stuff. So that does fall into the neighbor's category, and it protects you. We know how that protects you nowadays, even. And once again, it could all go back to number 6 there. You shall not murder. And you kind of, if somebody steals something.
I was going to say, what does the devil come to do?
Steal, rob, murder, right?
Yeah. And so you look at like 6 through 8, that comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
You violating just those 3 is the devil winning. So it's all right. It's kind of wanted to point that out.
No, that's perfect. And even adultery might be stealing somebody's wife. Number 8 there, don't bear false witness against your neighbor is number 9. In other words, don't lie against your neighbor. And I think that gets into the gossip kind of thing too. We always think about that, always wanting to break the news story and stuff like that. And I think gossip falls into that one.
Well, you can even think, so we watch TV here quite a bit, honestly, at times. got in her bedroom up at night. But you think of like those folks that are like falsely imprisoned. Is always what comes to mind when I see that, when it says always to tell the truth. How many like witnesses have like gotten on the stands and basically just ruined someone's life by lying? You know, saying that they were the suspect when they weren't, saying they were somewhere when it wasn't them, especially before, like now's day and age when you got all these smartphones, cameras and stuff as proof. Think before all that, you know, took place. You see what's kind of happened in the culture and society that we have now. And, you know, just think of how many people have been like falsely accused, falsely locked up for things they didn't do because folks didn't follow that commandment to not tell a lie, to not bear false witness. Like you could literally like lock someone up for years for life and they didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're not set free. You know, they go in their young age, they're not set free till they're old when the truth finally comes out. So again, you're ruining, you know, livelihoods and lives because you don't want to tell the truth. And honestly, like in my life, it's so much harder to think about lies. Like if I tell the truth, it's the truth. I'm going to say the truth. I don't have to remember anything. When you start to lie, you have to remember what you lied about. You switch it up, all of a sudden you're like, well, I don't even remember what it was. Well, you said this. Oh, did I say that? It's the truth you remember because it's the truth. So it's so much work to lie. I don't even understand that.
And I couldn't agree more with you. And I've had a specific person in my past that would lie a lot and start to believe those lies themselves. And it was infuriating because it was down to little things, like even something like, did you feed the dog? Yes. Well, I get home, the bag of dog food is still completely unopened. So there's no way you did it. And, you know, when confronted with, oh, I did, or I thought I beat you home. Well, what's the point? Why? It's difficult to understand why the little things, like, you know, I guess maybe you can say, I can understand why in big things, people might feel that temptation to lie, you know, to try for self-preservation or whatever. But the little things, when you show your character to lie about just something so small, it's infuriating. And I guess I'm glad I don't understand that. And I agree with Pierre that, you know, if you just tell the truth, there's nothing to try to remember. You don't have to try to go back and go, what did I say? Why did I say it? It's just there because it is what it is. So
it's easy to remember the truth. It's hard to remember a lie. That's what I've always heard. And that is so true. So don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Number 10 is you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his servants, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. And today it may be a zero-turn mower, you know, or a car, or a house, or a pool. You know, we can kind of insert some of those things into here that were possessions or belongings. And this is something where I don't know that our society necessarily gets anymore, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. Mm-hmm. But just seeing how much in debt people are, that maybe we don't. Maybe we do feel like we still have to keep up with the Joneses next door, that we got to have a bigger TV than they have. Maybe we got to have a nicer car than they have, or at least as nice of a car as they have. You know, it's tough to get out of that kind of being sold those things constantly over and over again on the television, on the radio. And it's so easy for us to get those worldly possessions, and maybe not necessarily to be better than our neighbor or to have exactly what our neighbor has, but just to have nice things so we don't get looked down upon. You know, I think that it's so easy to get into that habit.
Boy, it is a trap that is so easy to fall into, Wes. And, you know, Pierre and I are very competitive people. And so I think maybe even for me personally, I can say I think my competitive nature probably takes over in that. Like, not so much that I feel like I have to, but I want to. There's a desire there, a personal desire, just to have nice things, right? Like to feel like I've arrived and I've done all this hard work for something and I have something to show for it. But that's all empty, right? It's just it's not a filler. It's a false filler. It's those little beads that come in packaging, right? Like those foam beads that just go all over the place and you can't contain them. So
yeah, it's tough. I mean, and it's not even sometimes necessarily you want other people's things. It's like you said, you just kind of want nice things, and it's hard not to fall into that trap where you look around and you look at earthly possessions and you start to think, why not me, etc. Like I had that with like parents. So I lost both my parents. Around 35, I lost my mom was the last one, and you start to look and you get jealous that other folks, still have both their parents. Like for me, like older folks had both their parents. I'm like, well, what in the world? Why don't I want that? Those type of things. And I think house is tough. Like I always like watch the HGTV and I want that nice house. So those things are a little tougher, but again, they're just possessions. And if you get on social media, which is dangerous, you see all these highlights of people and them kind of posting the good in their life, and you don't see the bad, and you're thinking they're better off than you. But sometimes you can still follow those same people, and you can see that they're not as well off as you think they are. They may have that nice house, they may have those nice cars, but they're broken just like the rest of us, maybe even more so, because they turned to those things to fix their brokenness, and it didn't do the trick.
I believe that's why they have the saying, money does not buy happiness.
That's a good one. I wish I could teach my teenage daughter that. She
right.
gets well, and it's true. And I think girls have a different thing, and probably boys or kids all in general, especially comparing themselves to the kid next door or to the children that they run against. It's tough to do. And I was in that spot, and that's where I learned that I was not. When seventh grade hit me as a young man, and I started getting a little mustache and stuff, the hormones started kicking in a little bit. My eyes were opened up, and I realized, holy cow, I do not belong in this accelerated group of learning students, because all these kids have got nice things and I do not. And instead of coveting those things, I just went into a shell, right? And I went from being in the upper echelon stuff, just immediately dropping down into the lower part of school. And that's where I stuck, because that's where I belonged. And that's what I needed. And that's who I was with. And those are my people, a kind of a thing. And it was really strange how, our emotions can kick into gear like that because of the people that we surround ourselves with.
So true. A product of your environment.
I agree. Yes. And I know we'll probably have a music episode, but this just reminds me. So one of my favorite groups is Elevation Worship. If you haven't heard them, I recommend listening to them. But
Amen.
One of the songs that I've been drawn to is called Graves in the Gardens. And the opening of that song is really what drew me in to that song. And it starts, if you don't know it, it says, I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. And that's just kind of the reminder I try to give myself. Like, no matter how much recognition men give me, no matter the treasures that I build up here, that's never going to be enough. And it's not enough for those that have it either. You see the greed and just kind of what that stuff drives you to. But it follows up, then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. And to me, that just kind of wraps up what I want. I don't want empty praise. I don't want treasures that fade. I want the one that has all the answers, that, knit me in my mother's womb. That's ultimately what I'm searching for.
And along those lines, I take Olivia to school in the morning, and her thing recently is she wants to listen to the new Torrenwell CDs. So that's what we listen to on the way there. And the other day I said to her, you do know what this song's talking about, right? And she was like, no. And so we listened to the lyrics a little more, and it's called Empty. It's one of his new songs. And it starts out with, have you ever noticed that gold sparkles in the light, but it's cold in your hands? Have you ever filled your cup thinking it would feel like enough, but it don't last? And then when you don't even know what you're reaching for, it's the absence that tells you there's something more. You could have it all. You could have the whole world at your feet, every little thing you think you need, and still feel empty. And basically, then it goes on, you can have it all. You can have the best this life can bring, live in everybody else's dream and still feel empty. And it goes on from there. But it's to that point of you can fill up your life with stuff and with things and all these dreams and still feel empty. So I'm sure we see celebrities who commit suicide, who we think have it all, and, are depressed or, dealing with anxiety and those types of things. And if you're filling your life with the wrong things and trying to find your fulfillment in anything but God, I think that's what we run up against.
I think that you're absolutely right. And that's a good way to end by both of you quoting songs. I always like that.
We'll get to that episode.
Hey, make sure that we look at all these things, the Ten Commandments. Good rules to go by. If you want little ways to remember these things, to be able to have them in your mind, to be able to teach them on to your kids, don't be shy. Go ahead and Google some YouTube stuff and look at some kid things. And that's the way to get it in our brain. I think it's always a good thing to have these things at a readiness in our brain, just to be able to talk about them with other people. And we do appreciate you listening to the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. We definitely want you to be able to find your faith. We don't want you to lose any sleep. We want you to become reconciled to God, and however you want to do that in a way that be pleasing to your Lord. And we want to encourage you to hit those 5 stars. Sounds weird to say that stuff after you encourage somebody to turn the life over to God. It's weird to say, hey, make sure you hit the 5 stars. Make sure you leave a comment. But it does help the show. It helps get it out to other people. If you like what you're listening to, do hit those 5 stars and leave a comment on whatever listening platform you'd like to listen to it on. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Finding Faith Pod. And you can follow me at Lofinit. You can follow Pierre at PeeWee31. You can follow Michelle at GoPackGo411. And don't forget that you can write the show, email the show. Pierre, I don't have the email address written on here.
FindingFaith.losingsleep@gmail.com.
You do that so well as the editor and producer of the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. Thank you all for listening, and try to go out and find a way to make a positive impact in somebody's life today.